You think I'm scared of you? Logan Whitmore's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. He stepped forward, black belt gleaming at his waist, jaw-tight eyes locked on the woman standing at the edge of the festival square. You're a mechanic. You fix trucks for a living. So go ahead, swing first. I'll wait. Emily Carter didn't blink. She set down her coffee cup slowly, and she smiled. Not the smile of someone nervous, the smile of someone who had already decided how this ended. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop the name of your city in the comments below so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. And stay with me until the very end, because what happens next will change the way you think about quiet people forever. The morning Logan Whitmore rolled into Red Creek, Montana. The sky was the color of old iron and the air smelled like pine sap and engine grease. It was the kind of morning that made most people feel small against the mountains. Logan felt nothing of the sort. He never did. He drove a black Porsche Cayenne with tinted windows and a custom exhaust that made sure everyone within half a mile knew something expensive was coming. He parked it diagonally across two spaces in front of Harding's Diner, climbed out slowly like a man who expected applause, and stood on the sidewalk with both hands in his pockets, looking at the town the way a man looks at something he's already decided he owns. Red Creek was not a big town. Roughly 4,000 people lived there, give or take, the kind of place where everybody knew your truck and your grandmother's name and exactly which pew you sat in on Sunday. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't meant to be. It had the kind of quiet dignity that came from people working hard and not making a fuss about it. Logan looked at all of it and smirked. This is it, he said to no one in particular. His friend, Marcus, who had driven up behind him in a silver pickup, climbed out and looked around. Man, I thought you said your dad's property was in a good area. It is, Logan said. Good for hunting, good for privacy. That's it. He adjusted the chain around his neck, gold thick, conspicuous, and started walking toward the diner. He didn't hold the door open for the older woman coming out. He just shouldered past her and walked in like he owned the floor beneath his feet. That was Logan Whitmore at 24 years old. His father, Richard Whitmore, had built a real estate empire worth somewhere north of $40 million. Richard had grown up with nothing, clawed his way up through hard work and harder choices, and somewhere along the way had decided that his son would never know what it felt like to go without, which meant Logan had grown up knowing the price of everything and the value of nothing. The black belt wasn't just a belt. Logan had started martial arts training at age 9, not because he loved it, at least not at first, but because Richard had decided his son needed discipline. By 16, Logan had real talent. By 21, he had a regional championship title. By 23, he had 2 of them. But somewhere between the talent and the titles, something went wrong inside him. Winning started feeling like proof. Proof that he was better. Proof that other people mattered less. Every time someone backed down from him, every time a referee raised his hand, every time a crowd applauded, it fed something dark and hungry in his chest that never seemed to get full. He had come to Red Creek because his father owned a stretch of land outside town and wanted Logan to oversee some construction work on a lodge property. A summer project. 3 months, maybe 4. Logan had complained the entire drive up. Small towns bored him. Small towns meant small people. He had no idea who was already there. Emily Carter had lived in Red Creek for 6 years by the time Logan arrived. She ran a one-woman repair shop called Carter's Auto, tucked beside the old highway at the edge of town. The building itself was nothing fancy, a converted barn with 3 bays, a gravel lot out front, and a hand-painted sign that had faded in the Montana sun until the letters were barely readable. Most of her equipment she had bought secondhand and rebuilt herself. The coffee maker in her break room had been held together with electrical tape and stubbornness for 2 years. She was 37 years old, 5'7", with shoulder-length blonde hair. She kept pulled back in a braid most days because it stayed out of her face that way. She had blue eyes and a scar along her left jawline that she never talked about. She wore Carhartt jeans and steel-toe boots and whatever flannel shirt was closest to the door in the morning. She was not the kind of woman people looked at twice in a grocery store. Which was, if you knew anything about Emily Carter's actual history, either the greatest irony in the state of Montana or the most perfectly designed survival strategy you'd ever seen. The town knew her as quiet and competent and fair. She never overcharged. She never talked down to customers. She remembered people's names, asked about their kids, and had a standing arrangement with 3 elderly residents in town to check their vehicles for free twice a year because she knew they couldn't afford breakdowns. Dale Hutchins, who owned the hardware store 2 blocks over once, told his wife that Emily Carter was the most decent person in Red Creek. What the town did not know was what she had been before she picked up a wrench instead of a weapon. Emily never talked about her past. Not in the way people avoid topics because they're ashamed. She avoided it the way people avoid exposed electrical wires, carefully, deliberately, and because she understood exactly what touching them could do. Her younger brother, Caleb, lived with her. He was 22, studying online for a business degree, and worked part-time at the shop handling phones and invoices. Caleb was the one person on earth Emily would have dismantled an entire city to protect. He knew some of her history, not all of it, enough to know that his sister was not a woman you underestimated, and enough to know that the life she had built in Red Creek was something she had bled for in ways he couldn't fully name. The first time Caleb heard Logan Whitmore's name, it was because Logan had nearly run him off his bicycle on the county road. "He came up behind me doing at least 70, Caleb said, standing in the garage doorway, still breathing a little hard. "Didn't slow down, didn't swerve. I had to go into the ditch to not get hit." Emily was underneath a Chevy Silverado torque wrench in hand. She slid out from under the truck and looked at her brother. "You okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. But he didn't even brake. He just drove past and I could see him laughing in the mirror." She sat up on the creeper board and looked at his face for a moment. No bruises, no blood, just rattled. She breathed out slowly through her nose. Which way was he headed? "Toward Harding's, I think. Black Porsche, gold chain, probably mid-20s. I've seen him around town twice this week. Acts like he owns the place." "I'll drive that road tonight," Emily said quietly. "Put some reflectors out. Make it safer." Caleb looked at her. "That's it. Some guy almost kills me, and you're going to put out reflectors." "I'm going to keep you safe," Emily said. "That's the goal." She slid back under the truck. Caleb stood in the doorway for another second, watching his sister's legs sticking out from under 2 tons of pickup, and thought not for the first time that she was the strangest combination of calm and dangerous he had ever met. The second encounter was 3 days later at the gas station on Route 9. Logan had pulled in talking loudly on his phone and ignored the line of 2 people waiting at the pump. He simply pulled forward, cut in, and started fueling his Porsche without looking at anyone. The man he cut off, Frank Okafor, a retired postal worker, who Emily had known for 4 years, started to say something. Logan turned and looked at Frank with a very specific kind of expression. The kind that said, "Go ahead and finish that sentence, old man. I dare you." Frank went quiet. Logan went back to his phone call. Emily had been across the lot filling a gas can for the shop. She watched the whole thing. She didn't move. She just watched Logan's face, the way his shoulders were set, the way he held himself, the posture of a man who had never once in his life been made to feel the weight of his own actions. She recognized the type. She had met versions of Logan Whitmore in a dozen countries in a dozen different uniforms. The rank changed, the attitude never did. She finished filling the gas can, put the cap back on, and drove back to the shop. But she filed it away. Everything went into the file. Logan had been in Red Creek for 2 weeks when he first walked into Carter's auto. His Porsche needed an oil change, or rather he had driven it 1,500 miles past the interval because he couldn't be bothered, and the nearest dealer was 45 minutes away and booked out for a week. Marcus had mentioned the shop on the highway. Local place, probably some old guy. What Logan found was a woman lying under his car. He walked into the first bay without knocking, looked around at the organized rows of tools and the neatly stacked parts shelves and the handwritten work orders clipped to a board by the door and said, "Hey, anybody here?" Emily rolled out from under a customer's Land Cruiser. She was wiping her hands on a rag. She looked at him once, completely neutrally, and said, "Help you." Logan took in the blonde hair, the work clothes, the grease on her forearms. Something shifted in his expression. Not attraction. Something more condescending than that. The particular expression of a person recalibrating their expectations downward. "You work here." "I own it," Emily said. "Oh." "Oh." He said it like the word meant something it didn't. "I need an oil change, the black Porsche outside. Drop it off tomorrow morning. I can have it done by noon." "Can't you just do it now? It'll take like 20 minutes. I'm in the middle of a job, Emily said. Tomorrow morning. Logan looked at the Land Cruiser she'd been working on. That thing's been here a while. It's been here since this morning, Emily said. Her voice didn't change a temperature. And it was here first. Something behind Logan's eyes went flat. He was not used to being told to wait. He pulled out his wallet, set a $100 bill on the workbench beside the door and said, "That cover bumping me up." Emily looked at the 100, then she looked at him. "Tomorrow morning," she said, at 7:30. The 100 sat on the bench. Logan stared at her for a moment. Then he picked the bill back up and walked out without another word. That was the first time Emily Carter and Logan Whitmore were in the same room. It would not be the last. He came back the next morning at 7:40. She said nothing about the 10 minutes. She took his keys, wrote up the order, and told him it would be ready by 11. Logan sat in the small waiting area, 2 plastic chairs and a coffee maker that had seen better decades, and looked around like he was waiting in a bus station in a foreign country. He had his phone out. He was playing something loud without headphones. Caleb came in from the back at 8, saw Logan, and stopped. Logan looked up, looked at Caleb's face. "I've seen you before," he said. "Yeah," Caleb said. He kept his voice level. "On my bike, County Road." Logan held eye contact for a moment. Then he smiled, the wrong kind of smile, the kind that said he remembered and found it funny. "Right, thought so. You should stick to the sidewalk, man." Caleb's jaw tightened. He was 22, 6 feet tall and had his sister's same deep stubbornness. But he also had, after years of watching Emily navigate the world, enough sense to know that this parking lot was not the place. He walked to the back counter, picked up the phone, and started making the morning customer calls. But his hand was shaking. Logan watched him do it and smiled to himself. When Emily brought the Porsche around at 10:45 and handed Logan his keys, he said, "Your brother works for you." "He does," Emily said. "Cute family business," Logan said. He said it like it meant something else entirely. Emily looked at him steadily. "You're good to go. Oil's done, tire pressure's adjusted, and you've got a slow leak on your rear driver's side. Recommend getting that looked at before you're on the highway." Logan took his keys. "I'll get the dealer to handle it." "Suit yourself," she said. He started to walk away. Then he stopped, and without turning around, he said, "What's your name?" "Carter," she said. "Carter," he repeated, like he was filing it. He got in the Porsche and drove out without thanking her. Caleb came to stand beside his sister in the bay door, watching the car disappear. "I don't like him," he said. "I know," Emily said. "He's going to be a problem." Emily was quiet for a moment. "He might be," she said. "Let's just keep working." The third incident happened at Harding's Diner on a Wednesday evening. Emily came in for her usual coffee, chicken fried steak, a slice of pie if Donna had made lemon meringue, and found Logan already there with 2 of his friends at the big corner booth. Loud, ordering rounds of drinks like they were at a sports bar in the city, not drunk, just expansive. The kind of expansive that fills a room and makes quieter people feel squeezed out. She sat at the counter. Donna poured her coffee without being asked. "They've been here since 6, Donna murmured. "Ordered half the menu." "Good for business," Emily said. "Not if they keep talking over everybody else, it isn't." Emily sipped her coffee. Behind her, she could hear Logan telling a story, something about a tournament fight, how he had dropped some guy in under a minute, how the referee was still talking about it. His friends laughed on cue. She didn't turn around. Then she heard her name. Not her name exactly, but close enough. "That mechanic, the blonde one out on the highway." "Carter," Logan's voice. "Am I imagining things, or is she like locally famous for something?" One of his friends said something she couldn't hear. Logan laughed. "Seriously, people in this town are scared of a car mechanic. That's what I'm hearing." "I'm just saying what I heard," the friend said. "Frank said she's not someone you mess with." "Frank's a retired mail carrier," Logan said. "What does he know?" More laughter. Emily set her coffee cup down very carefully. She didn't turn around. She ate her chicken fried steak. She had 2 cups of coffee. Donna had made lemon meringue, and she ate a full slice. She left a 20 on the counter, 10 for the check. 10 for Donna, and she stood up. She turned around once, just briefly, to get her jacket from the stool beside her. Logan caught her eye across the diner. He raised his glass slightly. A mock toast. Grinning. Emily held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she put her jacket on and walked out. Outside in the cold Montana night, she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed the pine-heavy air. Not because she was upset, Because she was thinking. She was running a calculation in her head, the kind of calculation she had learned to run in a different life. One that involved moving pieces around a board and deciding when action was correct and when patience was correct. Patience, she decided. Still patience. She walked to her truck and drove home. Down. She had been 11 years in before she left the military. The details of what she had done in those 11 years were not the kind that appeared in public records. The unit she had served with was not the kind that held public ceremonies or posted group photos on base websites. What Emily Carter had done between the ages of 22 and 33 was classified in the way that certain operations always are buried under layers of paperwork that officially described activities and language, so bloodless and bureaucratic that reading it, you'd have no idea what the words actually referred to. What she had been was a specialist, not just in the infantry sense, in the specific, careful, high-stakes sense that involves small teams, hostile environments, in situations where the difference between success and failure is measured in seconds and centimeters. She had operated in 4 countries. She spoke passable Arabic and functional Spanish. She had been trained in interrogation resistance, close quarters combat field, medicine explosives, and the particular art of moving through spaces without being noticed, a skill she used daily in Red Creek simply by existing quietly. She had left when she had to, not because she wanted to, because Caleb was 17 and their parents were gone and there was no one else. She came back, filed her separation papers, drove Caleb to school for the first time in 2 years, and started figuring out what a person did with 11 years of classified skills in a civilian world. The answer eventually was motorcycles. Not hers alone. She had met the chapter 3 years before her separation during a stateside period when she had been temporarily assigned to an advisory role at a base in Nevada. A mutual contact, a retired Marine sergeant named Holt, who now ran a food truck in Reno, had introduced her to a man named Dutch. Dutch was 61 years old, had 4 arms like ship rope, and was the national president of the most feared riding chapter in the country. He had sized her up in about 30 seconds. Holt says, "You're the real thing," Dutch had said. "Holt's generous," she had said. "You ride since I was 14. Dutch nodded once. "Come to the meeting Saturday. We'll talk." She had gone to the meeting. She had sat quietly and listened and answered the questions they asked her directly and honestly. At the end of the night, Dutch walked her to her bike and said, "I'm going to tell you something I don't say often. You belong here." 6 months later, she had a patch. 2 years after that, she had a different kind of patch, the kind that meant she was in charge. Red Creek was her refuge. Her chapter understood that. They rode through, occasionally checked on her, kept their profile low. Emily's instructions had been direct. "This town is my home. We don't bring heat here. We help people here, and we stay clean here because Caleb goes to school here, and I'm not moving him again." Nobody in Red Creek knew any of it. Not the neighbors, not Frank Okafor, not even Donna at the diner. Nobody except Caleb, and Caleb knew enough to stay quiet. The incident at the hardware store was the one that shifted everything. It was a Saturday. Caleb had gone in to pick up some bolts and a replacement hinge for the garage side door. He was at the back of the store when Logan came in with Marcus. They were loud from the door. Dale Hutchins looked up from behind the counter with the expression of a man who had been hoping this particular customer would take his business elsewhere. Caleb kept his head down, focused on finding the right bolt size in the wall of drawers. He heard Logan's voice first. Then he heard his own name. "Hey, bicycle kid." Caleb turned slowly. Logan was standing at the end of the aisle, thumbs hooked in his jeans pockets, that gold chain catching the store light. Marcus hung back near the door. "You work for your sister, right? The mechanic." "Yeah," Caleb said. "She's got a reputation in this town," Logan said. "People act like I'm supposed to be careful around her." He took a step closer, not aggressive exactly, performatively relaxed, the walk of a man who was making a point about not being worried. "What do you think? Should I be careful around your sister?" Caleb looked at him steadily. "I think you should get whatever you came in for and have a good day." Logan smiled. "There it is. That's the same energy she has, that quiet thing." He tilted his head slightly. "My father's family has been in this county for 30 years. My grandfather built the first lodge up on the ridge. You've been here, what, 6 years? Your sister patches up old trucks." He paused. "I'm just saying, be realistic about how this town works. Caleb set the bolts down on the counter very carefully. Dale, he said, put those on the Carter account. I'll settle up Monday. Sure thing, Caleb, Dale said. His voice was tight. Caleb picked up the bag and walked toward the door. He had to walk past Logan to get there. He didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He looked straight ahead. As he passed, Logan said quietly, just barely loud enough to carry, tell your sister I've been hearing things. Interesting things about who she is. Caleb stopped. He stood very still for 1 second. Then he kept walking. He got into the truck, drove back to the shop, and walked straight to where Emily was working. He told her exactly what had been said, word for word in the order it happened. Emily listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. She was still holding a socket wrench. She set it down on the workbench without looking at it. He said he'd been hearing things about who you are, Caleb said. And what does that mean? Did someone... Nobody knows anything, Emily said. Her voice was level, completely level. There's nothing to know. He's fishing. Then why does it feel like... Because he's good at making people feel off balance, Emily said. That's his move. Make you feel like he has something. Make you react to something that doesn't exist. She looked at her brother. He doesn't have anything. Okay, Caleb said, but he didn't look entirely convinced. Emily picked up the socket wrench again. Go home tonight. Don't stop anywhere on the way. Text me when you're inside. Caleb stared at her. You're worried. I'm careful, she said. There's a difference. She turned back to the engine block in front of her. Go home, Caleb. He went. But after he left, Emily stood completely still for 2 full minutes, staring at the engine she wasn't seeing. And in the quietest part of her mind, where she kept the things she didn't say out loud, she made a decision. She picked up her phone. She typed a single sentence in a group message to 6 people she trusted with her life. She put the phone face down on the workbench and went back to work. 60 miles away in a bar outside Missoula, 6 phones buzzed one after another. The men who owned those phones read the message. They didn't talk about it. They didn't panic. They simply made certain calls of their own. And the machinery that Emily Carter had spent 15 years building slowly, quietly, and with great precision began to move. The morning before the festival, Logan did the thing that made everything irreversible. He came to the shop alone. No Marcus, no friends. Just him at 8 in the morning, walking into the first bay while Emily was in the middle of draining a transmission. She heard him come in. She didn't come out from under the truck immediately. She finished the step she was on, set the drain pan, and slid out. She stood up. He was standing in the middle of her bay with his arms crossed, and his face had changed since the diner. The performance was mostly gone. What was underneath it wasn't better. I know you used to be military, he said. Emily looked up at him. I had someone do some looking, he said. There's not a lot of public record on you, which is interesting all by itself, right? Because most people who serve, there's discharge papers, base records, something. For you, it's like, he made a small gesture. Nothing, like you didn't exist for about a decade. I served, Emily said. I left. I moved here. That's all there is. Maybe, Logan said. He was watching her face the way people watch faces when they're trying to catch something moving. But I've also been hearing just around town, just from people talking, that there are people who come through here sometimes. Riders, that they stop by your shop sometimes when you're closed. People stop by all the time, Emily said. It's a garage. Sure, he tilted his head. But these aren't people with breakdown trucks, are they? The silence between them was very specific. The kind of silence that has weight. What do you want, Logan? Emily said. He almost looked surprised that she used his name. I want you to understand something, he said. This is a small town. My father's family has deep roots here. Whatever history you have, whatever reputation, it doesn't transfer. Out here, you're just a mechanic. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that would stay with him long after the festival. She said it quietly, without heat, almost conversationally. Logan, she said, I'm going to give you one piece of advice, and it's going to be the best advice anyone gives you this year. Walk out of this garage, get in your car, stop pushing. He stared at her. Is that a threat? No, she said. It's a warning. There's a difference. She looked at him steadily. Threats come from people who are angry. Warnings come from people who are paying attention. Logan stood there for another moment. Then he straightened up, uncrossed his arms, and said, I'll see you at the festival, Carter. He walked out. Emily stood alone in the bay. She looked down at her hands. She wasn't shaking. She went to the back room, poured a cup of coffee from the old tape-together maker, and sat down on the bench for exactly 4 minutes. Then she picked up her phone and typed a second message, shorter than the first. Just 2 words. Come now. And in 6 different places, 6 engines turned over. The 2 words hit Dutch's phone at 8:47 in the morning. I was sitting at the table in the back room of the Missoula chapter house, drinking black coffee and going over a parts invoice with a man named Reeves when the phone buzzed against the wood. He picked it up, read it, set the coffee cup down. Reeves, he said, yeah, clear the table. Reeves looked at him for half a second, read the expression on Dutch's face and started stacking papers without asking why. Dutch typed back a single question. How many? Emily's reply came in under a minute. Don't know yet, but it's starting. Dutch stood up. He was 64 years old and moved like a man who had lived hard and survived harder, with a deliberate heaviness that wasn't slowness. It was the movement of someone who had learned that rushing got people killed. He went to the door of the back room and said to the 3 men playing cards at the far table, "Saddle up, we're going to Red Creek." One of them, a man named Terrell, looked up. When? Now means now, Dutch said. Nobody asked another question. Cards went face down, chairs scraped, jackets came off the hooks by the door. 60 miles away, Emily finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, and went back to work on the transmission. Not because she wasn't ready to move, because the work still needed doing, and because standing still waiting for trouble was the fastest way to let trouble find you on its terms. She had learned that a long time ago in a country she never named to anyone in Red Creek. You worked, you stayed grounded, you let the machinery run, and you kept your hands busy and your mind sharp. But she left the bay door open wider than usual, so she could hear everything coming. The Red Creek Summer Festival had been running for 31 years. It filled the town square from one end to the other. Food vendors' craft tables, a small stage for the high school band, a beer tent sponsored by the local hardware store that Dale Hutchins had been running for 15 years straight. Every family within 20 miles came down. Kids who had moved away came back. The oldest residents sat in folding chairs along the far edge and watched everything with the particular satisfaction of people who had seen this same event enough times to know exactly how it was supposed to go. It was, in other words, the worst possible place for what Logan Whitmore had decided to do. And the best possible stage for it if you were Logan Whitmore. He had been planning it since the morning he left Emily's garage. Not consciously, maybe he would have told you he was improvising, going on instinct, doing what felt right. But the truth was that Logan had a pattern. He always had. When someone refused to react to him, when someone stood in front of him and didn't flinch and didn't apologize and didn't move, something in him locked in like a targeting system. He couldn't let it go. He had never been able to let it go. His father had built that in him accidentally, in the way that certain fathers build certain things in certain sons without ever meaning to. Richard Whitmore had spent Logan's entire childhood telling him that weakness was the only sin, that you showed strength or you showed nothing, that backing down was the end of respect. Logan had absorbed all of it and none of the nuance that was supposed to come with it. So when Emily Carter looked at him in her garage and said, "Stop pushing," with the calm certainty of someone who already knew the outcome, Logan didn't hear a warning. He heard a challenge. He heard someone who thought they were better than him. And that particular sound had been rattling around inside his chest for 2 days by the time the festival morning arrived. He got there early. He walked the square. He shook hands with people who knew his father's name and smiled at everyone and ordered the first beer of the day at 11 in the morning and felt himself settling into something. Not calm exactly. Ready. Coiled. Marcus came up beside him at noon. "You doing okay?" "Perfect," Logan said. Marcus looked at him sideways. "Logan, whatever you're thinking." "I'm not thinking anything." Logan took a drink. "I'm just enjoying the festival." "Right," Marcus said flatly. He had known Logan since they were 12. He recognized the look. "Can you not do whatever this is? These are just regular people. This is their thing." "I know that," Logan said. "Then act like it." Logan smiled at him. "Relax, Marcus." Marcus did not relax. He stayed close for the next hour, watching his friend work the crowd, shaking hands and laughing at the right moments, and performing the version of himself that his father had coached him to show in public situations. It looked normal. It looked fine. And that was what worried Marcus most, because he knew that with Logan, the more normal it looked on the outside, the more pressure was building underneath. He was right. Emily arrived at the festival at 1 in the afternoon. She had changed into clean jeans and a dark button-down shirt. Her braid over one shoulder, no jewelry except a small ring on her right hand that she always wore and never explained. She walked in through the south entrance with her hands in her pockets and immediately did what she always did in any space she entered. She mapped it. Not in an obvious way, not the way security guards do it, scanning and obvious. The way she did it was invisible. A natural sweep, eyes moving easily across the crowd, noting exits, noting concentrations of people, noting who was watching, what and where the open channels were. Old habit. 11 years of muscle memory didn't come undone just because you moved to Montana. She found Frank Okafor at the edge of the craft tables and stopped to talk for a few minutes about his truck's suspension issues she'd fixed in the spring. She bought a slice of peach pie from the church auxiliary table because Mildred Chastain had been baking for that table for 26 years, and she deserved the $3. She said hello to Dale Hutchins in the beer tent and declined the offer of a cold one, not because she didn't want it, but because she wanted to be completely clear-headed today. Something in the air felt specific. She couldn't have named it to you in a way that would have made sense. It was a feeling she had developed over years, not paranoia, not anxiety, but a particular sharpening of awareness that had preceded certain events often enough that she had learned to take it seriously. Her old unit commander had called it threat weather, the way the barometric pressure shifts before a storm comes in. You can feel it before you can see it. She felt it now. She found Caleb near the stage, talking to a girl he'd been noticing for the past month. She touched his elbow once briefly. He looked at her. She didn't say anything with words. She raised her chin very slightly toward the far side of the square. Pay attention. He nodded once almost imperceptibly and went back to his conversation. But she noticed he shifted his position so his back was to the wall behind the stage. Good kid. She moved through the crowd slowly, and then she heard it, Logan's voice carrying over the ambient noise of the festival with the particular projection of someone who intended to be heard. I'm just looking for Carter, he was saying to someone near the beer tent. Not quietly. Somebody told me she'd be here. I've got something I want to settle. Emily stopped walking. She turned slowly. Logan was about 40 feet away, beer in hand, gold chain catching the afternoon light. He was talking to someone she didn't recognize, but his eyes were moving across the crowd, looking for her, and there was a small group around him now. Not all his friends, just people who had heard him and stopped. The way crowds always stop when they sense something is about to happen. She felt the shift, that particular gravity of a public moment gathering itself. She could walk away. She could leave the festival, go home, and let whatever Logan was building collapse under its own weight. She had done that before. She knew how to disappear from a situation without it being surrender. But Caleb was here. The people she'd known for 6 years were here. Frank was here. Mildred is here. Dale was here. She thought of what Logan had said in her garage. Out here, you're just a mechanic. She walked toward him. Alone. She was 12 feet away when he spotted her. Something changed in his face. The searching expression dropped away, and something else came in to replace it, focused, almost relieved. Like a man who had been holding a breath and finally let it go. Go. Carter, he said, loud enough to carry. There she is. People turned. The gravitational pull got stronger. Logan Shayima, she said, same tone she'd used in the garage. Level, not unfriendly, just flat. You having a good time? I was, he said. Now I'm having a great time. He took a step toward her, and the people nearby shifted unconsciously, instinctively, the way people move when two things are about to collide. I've been thinking about our conversation the other morning. Have you? You told me to stop pushing. He tilted his head slightly. I keep turning that over. Because see, I grew up being told that you don't back down from something just because someone tells you to. My father always said, I don't need to hear what your father said, Emily said. The crowd around them had gone noticeably quieter. Not silent, the festival noise was still there in the background, but in the immediate radius, conversation had stopped. People were watching. Logan smiled, but it was the tight smile now, the one that didn't reach anything. You know what your problem is, Carter? You walk around this town like you've got some big history, like people are supposed to be afraid of you. Maybe some of the locals bought into that. But I've been watching you for 3 weeks, and you know what I see." He paused. "A woman who's real good at staring at people. That's it." Someone in the crowd laughed nervously. Emily didn't look at whoever it was. She kept her eyes on Logan. "You done?" "Not even close," he said. "I'm a two-time regional champion. I have trained every single day for 15 years. And you stood in your garage 2 days ago and looked at me like I was some kind of inconvenience." His voice was measured, but underneath it, something was working hard to stay contained. "So here's what I'm proposing, right here, in front of all these people. Let's find out who actually has something to back up the attitude." The quiet spread further. Someone said, "Logan, come on," Marcus from behind him, urgent and low. Logan didn't turn around. Emily looked at him for a long moment. She was aware of everything, the crowd depth, the exits where Caleb was standing, what Logan's shoulders were doing, how his weight was distributed. Every piece of training she had ever received was running quietly in the background of her mind like an operating system that never actually turned off. "You're challenging me to a fight," she said. "Not a question, just a confirmation. I'm giving you the chance to prove what everyone in this town seems to think you are," he said. "And if I say no, then we all find out the truth," he said, "that the reputation was the whole thing, that there was never anything behind it." She looked at him. Then she looked briefly at the crowd. She saw faces she recognized: Frank Dale, 3 people from the church auxiliary, 2 families she knew by name, all of them watching, all of them waiting. She thought about patience. She thought about the calculation she had run for 3 weeks. She thought about every time she had absorbed Logan's provocations and filed them away and stayed quiet. And then she thought about Caleb standing with the girl he liked back against the wall, having to watch this man take up all the space in the room again. She removed her jacket, folded it, set it on the corner of the nearest table. "Okay," she said. "Sir." The crowd formed a ring without anyone organizing it. That was how these things always worked. People knew what space was needed before they could articulate why. The ring was maybe 25 feet across the crowd, 3 and 4 deep around the edges. Logan handed his beer to Marcus. Marcus took it with the expression of a man watching something he knows is going to go badly but can't stop. He said one more time quietly, "Don't do this." "Go stand over there," Logan said. Not unkindly, just final. Marcus went and stood over there. Logan squared up. He had good form, that much was immediately obvious to anyone who knew what they were looking at. His stance was clean weight balanced, hands up in the right configuration. 15 years of daily training left marks on a body that you could read if you knew how. He was athletic, sharp, quick. His eyes were focused and his breathing was controlled. Howe was without question a genuine martial artist. Emily stood across from him with her hands at her sides, not in a fighting stance, just standing. That rattled him. She could see it, a flicker of something that went through his expression and disappeared. He had expected a stance. He had expected her to mirror him, to signal that she was taking this seriously, to give him something to measure himself against. Instead, she was just standing there, arms, loose weight, centered, watching his face. "Any time," she said. He moved. Howe was fast, genuinely fast. He closed the distance with a combination that most people in that crowd never would have been able to track: a jab to set distance, a cross toward her center line, a pivot into a kick that was aimed for her midsection. It was textbook. It was well executed. It was the kind of combination that had ended a lot of fights quickly for him. Emily wasn't most people. She moved with him rather than away from him, not backward diagonal into his space inside the kick before it had any power, using the pivot he had built. Her right hand caught his extended arm at the wrist. Her hip turned. His own momentum did the rest. He went down hard. The crowd made a sound. Not a cheer, something more like a collective exhale, the sound of 30 people having the same thought at the same time. Logan hit the ground and was up in under 2 seconds, faster than she expected. She had a half step of genuine respect for that. He was not someone who folded from one throw. He came back up with his hands higher and his approach different. He had recalibrated in 2 seconds flat. "Okay," he said, and there was something real in his voice for the first time. Not the performance, something that sounded like a person. "Okay." Being attacked again, this time low, first a feint to the legs, then coming back up fast, trying to get inside her. He was smarter this time. He wasn't just running a combination from muscle memory. He was actually reading her, trying to find the pattern. In a different life, in a different situation, she might have told him he had real talent. She moved again. This time she let him get closer. Closer than felt comfortable, close enough that she could hear his breathing, and she felt the controlled power in his movement, real power properly trained, and she used the geometry of it. Left hand to his right shoulder, her body dropping slightly torque through her core. His next step landed wrong and she was already underneath his center of gravity. He went down again. This time he was slower getting up. Not hurt, just honest. For the first time in a very long time, Logan Whitmore was on the ground and didn't immediately know exactly how he'd gotten there. That was new. That was deeply, genuinely new. He got to one knee and looked at her, and his face had changed again. The performance was completely gone now. What was left was just a man confused and starting to understand something large. "Who are you?" he said, not aggressive, actually asking. "I told you who I am," Emily said. "I'm Carter. I fix trucks." He stood up slowly. He looked at her for a long moment, breathing hard, and she could see something happening behind his eyes. Not defeat exactly, but a reckoning. The particular look of a person whose fundamental understanding of a situation has been revised without their permission. "One more," he said. "Logan." That was Marcus, sharp and urgent, from the edge of the crowd. "Logan, stop." "One more," Logan said again. To Emily, not aggressive, almost like a question. She looked at him, and she made a decision that she could not have entirely explained the decision to let him come one more time, not to finish it cleanly, but to let him see the full version of what she was. Not for the crowd, not for herself, for him. Because something in his face, past the arrogance and the performance, looked like a person who had never once in his life been shown his actual limits by someone who was doing it without anger. She nodded once. He came in a third time, different again, slower, more careful, trying to read her instead of overpower her. And she met him in the middle of it, and this time when she moved with everything. Clean, quiet, completely controlled. No wasted motion, no unnecessary force. The kind of efficiency that only comes from doing something real rather than performing something practiced. He went down and stayed down, not unconscious, not seriously hurt, just finished, the way a candle goes out. He lay on his back staring at the sky above Red Creek and breathed, and the crowd was absolutely silent around the ring. Emily stepped back. She was breathing evenly. She wasn't hurt. She looked at Logan on the ground and said quietly enough that only the people nearest could hear, "You okay?" He turned his head and looked at her. "Yeah," he said. He sounded like a different person than the one who had walked in this morning. She nodded. She picked up her jacket from the table, and that was the moment the sound started. It came from outside the square, a low thunder at first, directional, coming from the South Road. Then louder, structured, the specific rhythmic percussion of multiple large engines running in formation, the kind of sound that you felt in your chest before you fully heard it with your ears. People at the edge of the crowd turned first. Then the turning spread inward like a wave. Motorcycles, not two or three, not a casual cluster of weekend riders, dozens, coming down the main road into Red Creek in a formation so precise and so unified that it looked choreographed the way military formations look when they come from years of moving together. Leather jackets, full patches, and on every jacket visible, even at distance, the same symbol, the same colors, the same chapter. Dutch's bike was at the front. He rode the way he did everything, unhurried, deliberate, immovable. Behind him came Reeves and Terrell and 6 others from Missoula, and behind them came riders who had come from further away, Billings, Great Falls, Bozeman, people who had seen a message and gotten on their bikes that morning without needing more explanation than 2 words from a woman they would follow anywhere. They rolled into the far edge of the square and stopped in a line. Engines died one by one, the sound falling away until there was quiet, the particular quiet of a very large crowd, suddenly very uncertain about what it was looking at. Dutch climbed off his bike. He was wearing his cut patches, visible to anyone who looked, and he moved through the edge of the crowd toward the open ring where Logan was just getting to his feet. People stepped aside, not out of rudeness, out of something older and more instinctive than that. He walked to Emily and stopped beside her. He looked at Logan. Then he looked at Emily. "You all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "Heard there was some trouble." "It's handled," she said. Dutch looked around the crowd slowly. Then he looked at Logan, who was standing fully upright, now staring at the row of motorcycles and the people who had come off them, and whose face had gone through so many expressions in the last 5 minutes that he seemed to have run out of the kind he knew how to make. Dutch studied him for a moment the way a man studies a tool he's trying to decide whether to keep or discard. "This the one?" Dutch said. "Yes," Emily said. Dutch nodded once. He didn't say anything else to Logan. He turned to Emily and said, "We'll be in town tonight. Put us wherever you need." "I know a spot," she said. Dutch put one hand on her shoulder briefly, firmly, the way people touch each other when words aren't the right instrument. Then he walked back toward his bike. And the crowd watched. All 4,000 people, or however many, were pressed into the square in that moment, watched and understood that they had just seen something they didn't have all the words for yet. They had come to a festival in a small mountain town in Montana, and they had learned in the space of about 20 minutes that the quiet blonde mechanic who patched their trucks and bought pie from the church table and said hello to everyone by name, that woman had an entire world behind her that none of them had known about. Logan Whitmore stood in the middle of it all, and finally, for the first time in his 24 years, felt the specific vertigo of understanding that he had walked into something that was much larger than him. Not just physically, not just in terms of the fight, in every sense, in terms of who Emily Carter was, what she represented, who stood behind her, and how profoundly, completely, and catastrophically he had misread the entire situation from the moment he pulled his Porsche into this town. Marcus appeared at his elbow. His friend, the one person who had told him to stop repeatedly and been ignored. Marcus looked at the motorcycles, looked at Logan, said nothing. Logan said, "I didn't know." "I know," Marcus said. She's, Logan started and stopped. "Yeah," Marcus said, "she is." Richard Whitmore's phone rang at 4:17 that afternoon. He was in his Billings office when his assistant put the call through. His son was on the line, and for the first time in a long time, Logan didn't sound like a man performing confidence for an audience. He sounded like a person. "Dad," he said, "I need to talk to you." Richard leaned back in his chair. His voice was careful and measured in the way of a man who had navigated difficult conversations for 4 decades. "What happened?" "I made a mistake," Logan said, "a big one, and I think it might not be something I can just walk away from." There was a pause on the line. Richard Whitmore was not a man who panicked, but something in his son's voice reached through the phone and touched something cold in his chest. "Tell me everything," Logan told him. When he finished, Richard was quiet for 11 seconds. Logan counted them. Then his father said, "Stay where you are. Don't speak to anyone else tonight. I'm making calls." "Dad, I said I'm making calls," Logan. The old authority in the voice. The Richard Whitmore who had built $40 million out of nothing. "This is fixable. Everything is fixable with the right people and the right resources. Just sit tight." Logan looked out the window of the hotel room at the Red Creek Square below, where people were still gathered in small groups, talking in the lowered tones of people processing something unusual. 2 motorcycles were parked near the hardware store. Their owners were nowhere visible, but their presence was understood. "Okay," Logan said. But even as he said it, he was thinking about the way Emily Carter had stood across from him, not in the fight before the fight, in the garage. The way she had said warnings come from people who are paying attention with a steadiness that had no performance in it. None. It was the voice of someone who had been through things he couldn't imagine, who had come out the other side and who had chosen deliberately to build something quiet and decent in a small town in Montana. And he had walked into it like he walked into everything, like it already belonged to him, like she should be grateful he was paying attention. For the first time in his adult life, Logan Whitmore sat with that feeling and didn't immediately try to make it go away. His father was already dialing lawyers. Logan sat by the window and watched the motorcycles and thought about a woman who had given him a warning he hadn't been built to hear. And for the first time, slowly, uncomfortably, like a bone being reset, he wondered if the problem had never been the people who were in his way. He wondered if the problem had always been the way he was walking. Richard Whitmore did not sleep that night. He sat in his home office in Billings with 3 phones on the desk and worked the way he had worked his entire adult life, systematically, without sentiment, treating the problem in front of him the way he treated every problem, as a transaction, something with inputs and outputs, something that could be managed if you applied enough pressure to the right places. By midnight, he had spoken to 2 attorneys, a private investigator named Strand, who had worked for him before on matters he preferred not to document, and a county commissioner who owed him a favor from a land deal 3 years ago. By 2 in the morning, he had a preliminary picture. By 4, he had a plan. He called Logan at 6:15. Logan answered on the first ring. He hadn't slept either, though, for entirely different reasons. "I've been talking to people," Richard said. His voice was the business voice, flat, rapid, no wasted syllables. "Here's what I know. Emily Carter has no criminal record. She has no civil judgments. Her business is clean. Her taxes are filed. On paper, she is completely ordinary." He paused. "Which means whoever she was before she got to Red Creek, she was careful about covering it." "Dad, I'm not finished. The motorcycle group at the festival, I've confirmed who they are. That's a serious organization, Logan. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." Another pause. "But serious organizations have vulnerabilities. They have members with records. They have associations that can be examined. And Emily Carter, if she is who I think she is, has connections that will not survive a close legal look." Logan was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to protect this family," Richard said, "the way I always have." "That's not what I asked." "Logan," the voice sharpened, "she humiliated you in front of this entire town. She has people who came into Red Creek and created an atmosphere of intimidation. That is actionable. That is something a good attorney can work with." Logan sat on the edge of the hotel bed and looked at the floor. "She didn't intimidate anyone, Dad. They showed up. They parked their bikes. Nobody did anything. The presence of a known criminal organization at a public event. They don't have convictions," Logan said. "You just said her record was clean. You can't." "I can do quite a lot with the right people involved," Richard said, and there was something in the voice then that made Logan go quiet. Not the confident father, something harder than that. Something that had built $40 million by finding the pressure points in situations and bearing down on them until they gave. "You let me handle this." Logan said nothing. "Logan." "Yeah," Logan said finally. "Okay." He hung up and sat there for a long time. Outside, Red Creek was just waking up. He could hear the town starting its day, someone's truck turning over a door somewhere, the distant sound of the highway. Normal, unhurried, the sounds of a place that knew exactly what it was and didn't need to prove anything. I thought about what Dutch had said to Emily. "You all right?" And the way she had answered. "I'm fine. It's handled." 2 sentences and a nod, and that was the entire conversation between the leader of a major national chapter and the woman who ran the chapter. No drama, no posturing, just handled. He had spent his whole life performing strength for audiences, and he had watched a woman who didn't perform anything for anyone ever. He picked up his phone again. He almost called his father back. Instead, he set the phone face down on the bed and didn't touch it for an hour. In that hour, Richard Whitmore had already put 3 things in motion. Sir. Strand arrived in Red Creek at 9 in the morning. He was a compact man in his late 40s, gray at the temples, who dressed like an insurance adjuster and had the specific quality of someone who knew how not to be noticed. He drove a rental car, paid cash for a room at the motel on Route 9, and spent the first 2 hours walking around town with a cup of coffee and his phone looking like a tourist. He was not a tourist. I had a document on his phone, a briefing Richard Whitmore had sent at 5 in the morning, pulled together from sources. Logan couldn't have named that laid out everything Richard had been able to compile about Emily Carter in the hours since Logan's phone call, which was less than Richard had hoped for and more than most people would have been able to find. The military service was real, but the records were sealed in ways that Strand had encountered before, the kind of sealing that didn't happen to regular infantry, the kind that required people with specific clearances to request and specific reasons to justify. Strand had tried 2 approaches to those records in the early morning hours and hit walls both times. That told him something important. Whatever Emily Carter had done in the military, it had been significant enough to warrant protection that still held 6 years after her discharge. The chapter connection was harder to trace than Richard had expected. She didn't appear on any membership rolls because those roles didn't exist in any accessible form. She had no documented association in law enforcement databases. Strand found one reference buried in a DEA field report from 4 years ago that mentioned a woman matching her description in passing during a surveillance operation in Nevada, not as a target, just as an observed presence. The report noted she had been identified as a civilian advisor and cleared on the spot. Strand photographed that page and sent it to Richard without comment. He spent the rest of the morning at the diner and the hardware store and two other places where he could listen to people talk, because in small towns, people talked, and what they said when they thought they were just having a conversation was usually more useful than anything you could find in a database. What he heard surprised him. He heard affection, that was the word for it. Not just tolerance or familiarity, actual warmth, the kind that people directed at someone who had earned it through years of showing up quietly and doing right by the people around her. Donna at the diner talked about Emily without being asked the way people talk about family. Dale Hutchins, when the conversation drifted that way, naturally said she was the most decent person in Red Creek and said it with the certainty of someone who had given it real thought. An older woman, Mildred from the church auxiliary, mentioned Emily by name when talking about who in town she trusted to tell the truth about anything. Strand wrote all of it down. He wrote it down because it was data, and he prided himself on collecting complete data. But there was a separate thing happening in the back of his professional mind, a kind of secondary assessment that ran regardless of what he was being paid. And what that assessment was telling him with increasing clarity as the morning went on was that Richard Whitmore's version of this situation, where Emily Carter was a dangerous interloper who had embarrassed his son and needed to be dismantled, was not the version that matched the evidence on the ground. He called Richard at noon. "She's clean," he said, "genuinely clean. The military history is sealed, which means it's significant, but there's nothing actionable in it from what I can access. The chapter connection exists, but it's not documentable in a way that would hold up to scrutiny. Her business is legitimate. Her community standing is," he paused, chose the word carefully, "exceptional." There was silence on Richard's end. "What about the festival?" Richard said. "The motorcycles, the intimidation." "I spoke to 3 people who were there," Strand said. "Nobody experienced intimidation. They pulled up, parked, talked to her for 90 seconds, and stayed quiet all evening. The only person who created a threatening atmosphere at that festival was your son." Another silence, longer this time. "That's not the report I hired you for," Richard said. "It's the accurate one," Strand said. "You want me to build you something that isn't accurate, you need a different person." "I don't do that." The silence stretched. Then Richard said, "What would you do?" Strand looked out the diner window. "I'd call my son. I'd tell him to apologize to the woman. I'd get off the highway before I got on it any further with someone whose profile I can't crack and whose community thinks she walks on water." He paused. "That's what I'd do." Richard hung up without responding. Strand finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and drove back to the motel to check out. His involvement in this particular situation was in his professional judgment complete. Whether Richard Whitmore listened to the advice was not his problem. He had a feeling Richard was not going to listen to the advice. Emily knew someone had been asking questions around town before Donna told her. Donna called at 12:40. "There was a man in here," she said without preamble, because Donna had known Emily long enough to know that preamble was mostly wasted on her. "Gray at the temples, rental car. He was asking about you, not directly the way people ask when they're trying not to seem like they're asking." "What did you tell him?" Emily said. "I told him you were the best mechanic in the county and that anybody who had a problem with you had a problem with me." A pause. "Was that right?" "That was perfect," Emily said. "Donna, thank you." She hung up and immediately called Dutch. He picked up on the second ring. "Already know," he said. "Terrell spotted him outside the hardware store this morning. Former PI, maybe current, runs out of Billings. Works for money people." "Whitmore," Emily said. "That's my read." Emily leaned against the workbench. "He won't find anything." "No," Dutch agreed, "but finding nothing doesn't always stop people like that. Sometimes they build something out of nothing. You know that." "I know that," she said. "So what do you want to do?" She thought for a moment. She was thinking about Caleb, who had a business degree to finish, and a girl he was starting to like, and a life to build in a town that had been safe for 6 years. She was thinking about Donna and Frank and Dale and Mildred and all the people who had said her name warmly to a man with a rental car and gray temples, not knowing they were being recorded. She was thinking about the look on Logan's face when he sat on the ground and said, "Who are you?" not aggressive, actually asking. The first honest question he might have asked anyone in years. She was thinking about the difference between a problem and a person. "Nothing yet," she said. "Let him look. There's nothing to find. And if he starts building something, then we'll know it's the father, not the son," she said, "and we deal with them separately." Dutch was quiet for a moment. You're doing that thing, he said. What thing? The thing where you're 2 moves ahead and you're not telling me what the second move is. She almost smiled. I'll tell you if we need it. Emily? Dutch. Another pause. She could hear him breathing on the other end, the particular measured quality of a man who trusted her completely and was nonetheless professionally uncomfortable with incomplete information. All right, he said finally, but you pull that string when you need to. Don't wait until it's tight around your neck. I never have, she said. She hung up and went back to work. But somewhere in the back of her mind, where the operational part of her brain ran its quiet and continuous calculations, something had shifted. The situation had moved from Logan to Richard. That was a different problem with different weight. Logan was arrogance and ego difficult, but ultimately the kind of thing that burned itself out when it hit real resistance. Richard was strategy and resources, and strategy with resources didn't burn out. It adapted. She was going to need to adapt first. The letter arrived at Carter's Auto on a Thursday morning, 3 days after the festival. It came in a standard envelope from a law firm in Billings, Mercer, Holt and Associates, established 1987, 3 floors in a downtown building that cost more per square foot than Emily's entire shop. The letter was 2 pages, single-spaced, dense with legal language that had been carefully chosen for its dual function to sound official enough to intimidate and to be just vague enough that it couldn't be called explicitly false. The substance of it, stripped of the language, was this: Richard Whitmore was alleging that Emily Carter's business had been operating as a front for illegal activity, that the presence of a known criminal organization at the Red Creek Summer Festival constituted a threat to the Whitmore family's safety, and that unless Emily Carter agreed to a meeting with their attorneys within 10 days to discuss terms, they would be filing complaints with the Montana Attorney General's office and pursuing civil litigation. Emily read it twice, standing at the front counter still holding the envelope. Then she set it down, went to the back room and poured a cup of coffee. Caleb came in from the parking lot and saw her face. What happened? She handed him the letter. He read it. She watched his face go through 3 distinct changes: confusion, then understanding, then anger, the bright, specific anger of someone who is 22 years old and has not yet learned to put a ceiling on his reactions. He set the letter down. He's going after your business. He's trying to. This is insane. He can't actually believe. He doesn't believe it, she said. That's not what this is. This is pressure. He's trying to make the cost of staying in this situation higher than the cost of walking away from it. Caleb looked at the letter again. What do we do? I make a phone call, she said, and then we open the shop and have a normal day. To who? She picked up her phone. Someone who owes me something. She went to the back parking lot and made the call, standing in the morning air alone, with the door closed behind her. The call lasted 6 minutes. She spoke quietly and without raising her voice, and in a register that Caleb, if he had been able to hear her, would not have fully recognized as his sister's, a voice that was precise and authoritative and completely at ease with the weight of what it was discussing. When she came back inside, she handed Caleb the letter. Put that in the red file in the bottom drawer, the one with the lock. Who did you just call? She looked at him steadily. Someone from before. That was all she said. Caleb knew from the way she said it, the specific inflection of before the word, that in their private language covered an entire decade that was mostly off limits, that she had just reached into a part of her history that she kept thoroughly separate from their life in Red Creek. He filed the letter. He didn't ask again. 230 miles away in an office building in Helena, a woman named Carver picked up the phone on her desk and made a call of her own. To a person who made a call to another person, the chain was short. 3 links, because some things, once you had been part of them, didn't require a long chain. Richard Whitmore's attorney received a call at 2 that afternoon from the Montana Attorney General's office. Not a formal inquiry, something less formal and considerably more significant. A conversation, the kind that happened between people who had worked in the same world long enough to understand that some situations were worth examining before they became official. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. At 3:15, Richard Whitmore received a call from his attorney. The attorney, whose name was Mercer and who had handled Richard's legal affairs for 11 years, sounded different than he usually sounded, careful in a new way. Richard, he said, I need you to tell me exactly what you know about this woman, not what you think, what you actually know for certain. Richard told him. The same briefing he had given Strand, the same picture assembled from the PI's report and his own assessment. Mercer was quiet for a moment. The complaint to the AG's office, I'm going to recommend we hold on that. Richard's voice went flat. Why? Because I received an interesting call today, Mercer said, from someone at the AG's office. And the tone of that call suggested that if we file what we currently have, it will be examined very closely. And that examination might not be limited to Emily Carter's activities. The silence that followed was different from the silences Richard had been sitting in for the past 3 days. Those silences were calculating. This one was something else. What are you telling me? Richard said. I'm telling you, Mercer said carefully, that whatever this woman's history is, whatever she did before she became a mechanic in Red Creek, she has friends in places that I cannot get to. And that if you continue pushing, the people in those places are going to start looking at the push rather than the pushy. A pause. I've been your lawyer for 11 years, Richard. I'm telling you as your lawyer and as someone who would prefer to keep working for you, let this go. Richard sat in his office for a long time after that call. He had built everything he had by never letting things go, by finding the angle and working it until it opened. That was the mechanism of his life. It was the same mechanism he had accidentally installed in his son. And for the first time in a very long time, Richard Whitmore was staring at a situation where every angle he tried to work bent back toward him. He picked up the phone, he dialed Logan. It's me, he said, come home. Logan was in his hotel room. He had been sitting there most of the day, not going out, not calling anyone, in a state of unusual stillness that was new to him and that he didn't fully have language for yet. Why puss I him? Because I can't help you from here, Richard said. And then very quietly, in a voice that Logan had heard almost never in 24 years, a voice that was not the builder, not the strategist, not the performer of strength, and I think I may have made things worse. Logan was so surprised by the honesty of it that he didn't respond for a moment. His father, the man who had built $40 million on the principle that weakness was the only sin, had just said, I made things worse. Those 4 words in that voice were more disorienting than anything that had happened in the festival square. Okay, Logan said finally. I'll come home. Good. A pause, then Richard said, were you hurt at the festival? No, Logan said. She's very good, Richard said, not bitterly, almost neutrally. Yeah, Logan said. She is. Another pause. I'll see you tomorrow. Richard hung up. He sat for a moment longer. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a bottle of bourbon. He kept there for situations that called for something beyond his usual control. He poured 2 fingers. He sat with it without drinking it for a while, looking at the wall. I thought about the call from Mercer, about friends and places I cannot get to. He thought about a woman who ran a 1-person repair shop in a 4,000-person town, who bought pie at church tables and kept her hair in a braid, who had just parried everything he threw at her without appearing to exert herself. He drank the bourbon. He had a very particular feeling that he had not experienced in a long time. The feeling of having encountered something that was bigger than his ability to purchase his way around it. He didn't like the feeling. But somewhere underneath the discomfort, where something honest had survived 40 years of hardening, he recognized it for what it was. Respect. Emily found out about Richard's retreat through Dutch, who had a source in Billings that Emily had never asked him to name. The source told Dutch that Mercer, Holt, and Associates had internally pulled back the complaint, that Richard Whitmore had made no new moves in 48 hours, and that Logan had checked out of the Red Creek Motel and driven south. Dutch called Emily on a Friday evening. She was closing the shop. He's pulling back, Dutch said. I heard, she said. She was locking the bay door phone between her ear and shoulder. You going to tell me who you called? Dutch said. Carver, Emily said. Dutch made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. I forgot you had that. I try to forget I have it too, she said. I don't like using it, but you will when you need to. Obviously. Emily. Dutch's voice shifted into something less operational, more personal, the voice he used when he was being a person rather than a president. You doing okay? Actually okay, not mission okay. She stopped walking, stood still for a moment in the parking lot. The evening was cool, the sky going amber above the tree line. She thought about the actual answer to that question, the honest one rather than the efficient one. I'm tired, she said. I'm tired of being found. Every time I think I've gotten far enough from it. I know, Dutch said. Caleb's building something here, she said. The girl he's been seeing, the business program. He's building a life, and every time something like this happens, I feel it threatening that. Not me, him. Caleb is stronger than you give him credit for. I know he is, she said. That's not the point. Dutch was quiet for a moment. What's the point? She thought about it. Really thought the way she rarely let herself when there was work to do. The point is, I chose this town because it was quiet, because it was safe, and I don't want to be the reason it becomes something else. She's breathed out. I keep winning these little confrontations, and I keep thinking at what cost? What does it cost the place I built to be the place where this keeps happening? It costs less than you think, Dutch said, because of what you are here. Do you understand that these people, Donna the hardware store guy, Mildred with the pie, they talked to a private investigator about you, and they made him feel like he'd walked into the wrong town. That's not nothing, that's everything. Emily was quiet. You're not a danger to this place, Dutch said. You're the reason this place is what it is. She stood in the parking lot for another moment. The sky had gone deeper, more orange, the mountains dark at their tops. You're more philosophical than usual tonight, she said. I've been writing a lot, Dutch said. It does that. She almost laughed. Tell Terrell thanks. Tell everyone thanks. They didn't come for thanks, Dutch said. They came for you. She ended the call and stood alone for a minute longer. Then she went back into the shop, turned off the last lights, and drove home. Caleb was at the kitchen table with his laptop and a plate of toast, in the particular posture of someone who was pretending to work but actually waiting. He looked up when she came in. Well, Whitmore's pulling back, she said. His lawyers got a call, and they got cold feet. Caleb stared at her. How? I made a call, she said. Same words as before. He understood they were going to be the same answer. He accepted it. So it's over, he said. She sat down across from him. She looked at her brother, 22 years old, toast crumbs on his shirt hair, still doing the thing it had done since he was 7, something in his face that looked more and more like their mother every year. This round, she said. He looked at her carefully. What does that mean? It means Richard Whitmore isn't someone who actually stops, she said. He's someone who retreats and reassesses. He'll leave us alone for a while, but he's not built for letting things go. Eventually, he'll find a different angle. Caleb absorbed this. And when he does, she said, we'll be ready. She looked at him steadily, the same way we always are. Caleb picked up his toast. He ate it. He looked at his laptop and then at his sister and then at his laptop again. You know what I hate, he said. Tell me. I hate that you can't just be a mechanic, he said. Like actually just be a mechanic. No history, no chapter, no calls from before. Just someone who fixes trucks and buys pie and doesn't have to manage any of this. He paused. You should be able to just have the town. Emily looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that she let him see because he was Caleb, and he was the one person on earth she didn't always guard against. I do have the town, she said quietly. Caleb held her gaze. I do, she said again. Whatever else is underneath it, I have the town. That part is real. He nodded slowly. He seemed to want to say more and to be deciding against it, the particular look of a 22-year-old, learning that some truths don't need to be pushed further just because you see them. He closed his laptop. I'm going to bed. Good night, she said. He stopped in the doorway without turning around. I'm glad Dutch came. Me too, she said. And I'm glad you texted him. Go to bed, Caleb. He went. Emily sat at the table alone. She poured a glass of water. She sat with it in her hands, not drinking it, just holding something solid. She thought about Richard Whitmore sitting in his Billings office reassessing. She thought about Logan in his car driving south carrying a new weight that hadn't been there when he drove north 3 weeks ago. She thought about the festival square and the sound of the motorcycles and Dutch's hand on her shoulder, and Donna talking about her to a gray-haired man who took notes. But it would, because Richard Whitmore had not in fact let it go. He had simply moved to a longer timeline. And in the space between Emily's quiet Friday night and the thing Richard was beginning to build, there was a window narrow specific, closing in which everything would either resolve or explode into something that Red Creek was not equipped to contain. Emily didn't know about the window yet, but somewhere in the part of her that never fully slept, in the operational core that 11 years of training had built into the architecture of who she was, something was already listening for the sound of it closing. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after Logan drove south. Emily was under a Ford F-250 replacing a cracked exhaust manifold when her phone buzzed on the concrete beside her. She didn't stop working. She finished the bowl. She was torquing, slid out, picked up the phone. Unknown number, Montana area code. She answered anyway. She always answered unknown numbers. In her experience, the calls worth taking were rarely the ones you expected. Is this Emily Carter? The voice was male, mid-40s, careful. Not aggressive, not legal. Something between official and cautious. Depends who's asking, she said. My name is Ben Okafor, the voice said. Frank's son. I'm a reporter. I work for the Billings Gazette. She was quiet for a moment. Frank Okafor's son. She had met Ben exactly once 2 Christmases ago when he had driven up to spend the holiday with his father. Quiet man, watchful. She remembered thinking he had the specific patience of someone who spent his life listening to people. Frank gave you my number, she said. He said you were the right person to talk to. A pause. Ms. Carter, I've been working a story for the past 3 months on Richard Whitmore's real estate operations in central Montana, specifically on a pattern of land acquisitions that appear to involve pressure tactics against smaller property owners. I've been building a file. Last week I got a tip that he engaged a private investigator to look into a resident of Red Creek, and that the same law firm that sent you a letter recently pulled back a complaint they had been preparing for the AG's office. Another pause. The tip came from inside the firm. Emily sat down on this creeper board. She was very still. You've got a source inside Mercer Holt. I can't confirm that, Ben said, but I'd like to talk to you, in person if possible. I think what happened to you in Red Creek is part of a larger pattern, and I think you have context I don't have yet. She thought for exactly 4 seconds. She thought about the longer timeline she had been waiting for Richard to execute. She thought about the window she had felt closing the night she sat at her kitchen table. She thought about Ben Okafor, whose father she trusted completely, sitting somewhere with a 3-month file. Come to Red Creek, she said. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Don't tell anyone you're coming. Understood, Ben said. She hung up and sat on the creeper board in the middle of her bay for a moment, staring at nothing. Then she picked up the phone again and called Dutch. He made a second move, she said when Dutch picked up, but someone else moved first. Ben Okafor arrived at Carter's Auto at 8:57 the next morning in a 4-year-old Subaru with a cracked windshield and a press badge clipped to his visor. He was 34, built like his father, but with something more contained in his expression, Frank's warmth compressed by years of learning to listen without giving himself away. He shook Emily's hand and looked around the shop with the observational sweep of someone who cataloged details for a living. She brought him to the break room. She poured him coffee from the taped-together maker. She sat across from him and said, "Show me what you have." He opened his laptop. He had organized it well chronologically with sources flagged and documents attached. She read for 11 minutes without speaking. Ben sat across from her and drank his coffee and waited, which told her something useful about him. People who couldn't wait during silences usually couldn't be trusted with the kind of information she was deciding whether to share. The file was substantial. Richard Whitmore had been acquiring land in central Montana for 7 years through a network of shell companies that obscured his ownership until the transactions were complete. 3 families had sold properties at below-market prices after receiving what Ben's sources described as sustained pressure visits from intermediaries, interference with water rights, zoning complaints filed against their properties. One family, the Hendersons, had sold a 400-acre ranch for 60 cents on the dollar after a series of code violations suddenly appeared on their property following a meeting with one of Richard's representatives. He targets people who can't fight back, Ben said when she looked up from the screen. Small operators, no lawyers, no resources. He creates the pressure until the cost of holding on is higher than the cost of selling. The same play he tried with me, Emily said. Exactly the same, except you had resources he didn't know about. Ben paused. Which is actually what I think makes your situation useful to the story, because you're the first person he's tried this on who could push back. And the way he retreated when you did that tells us something about how the pressure works, about how artificial it is. Emily looked at him steadily. What do you want from me? On record, anything you're willing to give. The letter, the timeline, your experience at the festival. He paused. Off record, I want to understand who you are, not to publish it. To understand what I'm looking at. She looked at him for a long moment. You understand that I'm a private person? I do, he said. My father described you as someone who earned your quiet. I respect that. The phrase landed carefully. Earned your quiet. It was exactly the right phrase. She thought about Frank Okafor, the man who hadn't said anything when Logan cut him off at the gas pump, the man whose instinct about her had been generous and accurate from the first time they met. She thought about what it said about a person's character that his son, a professional investigator of a different kind, would sit across from a stranger and lead with something that measured rather than demanded. I'll give you the letter, she said, on record, the timeline of what happened on record. My personal history, not for print. That's enough, Ben said. But I need to know your timeline, she said. When does this run? I've been waiting on two final sources, Ben said. Both of them are former employees of companies Whitmore used as intermediaries. They're scared. They've been deciding for months. After I got the tip about Red Creek, one of them called me. He paused. I think we're close to ready. 2 weeks, maybe 3. And Richard doesn't know you're here. Not yet, Ben said. But reporters contact subjects for comment before publication. He'll know eventually, 2 weeks before the story runs roughly. Emily nodded slowly. She was running the calculation again, the one she had been running since the letter arrived, since the call from Dutch about Strand, since the festival square. The board had just changed significantly. There was a new piece on it, a piece that moved differently than any piece Richard Whitmore would have anticipated. Do the Henderson family want to talk? She said. Ben looked surprised. They're nervous. They feel exposed. If I called them, Emily said, would they talk to you? Ben stared at her. You know the Hendersons. I know of them, she said. I know someone who does. I can make an introduction if you want one. Bun set down his coffee cup. He looked at her with an expression that had a layer of professional calibration in it, but beneath that something more genuine. The expression of a person who has been working a story for 3 months in relative isolation and has just been handed a door he hadn't seen before. Mr. Carterman, he said, I think I understand now why Richard Whitmore picked the wrong person. He didn't pick me, she said. His son did, and his son didn't know what he was picking. She pulled her phone out and made the call to Dutch right there at the break room table, not hiding it. Ben watched her. She spoke for 3 minutes, got the number she needed, and hung up. She wrote it on a notepad, tore off the page, and pushed it across to Ben. He looked at it. This is a direct line to the older Henderson son, she said. Tell him I sent you. Tell him I said it was time. Bun folded the paper carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at her once more, the specific look of someone recalibrating something significant. Can I ask you one thing off the record? You can ask, she said. When Logan Whitmore challenged you at the festival, Ben said, and you agreed to it, was that calculated? Did you know what was coming next? She thought about the honest answer, about taking her jacket off and setting it on the table, about the way the crowd formed its ring, about Dutch's motorcycles on the South Road. I knew what might come, she said, not what would. There's a difference. Were you afraid? She looked at him with something that was almost but not quite amusement. Of Logan, she said. Ben looked at her, then he nodded once understanding. Of Richard, he said. Her expression shifted. Something more honest came through. A little, she said. Not of what he could do to me, of what he might do to this town, to the people who talked about me to his investigator because they thought they were just having a conversation. She paused. Fear for other people is harder to manage than fear for yourself. You can discipline your own reactions. You can't discipline a situation you don't fully control. Bun was quiet for a moment. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in 3 months of reporting this story. You should put that in your notes, she said, off record. He almost smiled. Already did. She called the Henderson number herself that afternoon, before Ben had a chance to. She called because she wanted to hear their situation directly in their own words before she decided how much further to lean into what was building. The older son, Gary Henderson, picked up on the fourth ring. He was 51, spoke slowly in the cadence of a man who had grown up with land and animals, in the kind of patience that came from understanding that most things in nature moved on their own schedule. When Emily said her name and said Dutch had passed the number, there was a silence on the line. I've heard of you, Gary said, from people I trust. I'm not going to ask you to do anything you're not comfortable with, Emily said. I want you to know that first. The reporter Ben Okafor, he's Frank Okafor's son. Frank is someone I trust with my life. His son is built the same way. What happened to your shop, Gary said, the letter and all. Same pattern as yours, she said, different tools, same pressure. Gary was quiet for a moment. She could hear something in the background, wind maybe, or a fan. the particular ambient sound of an open space that had been lived in for generations. We shouldn't have sold, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the voice of someone who had been carrying that sentence for a long time and was putting it down for a moment to look at it. My father built that ranch. My grandfather cleared the first field on it. And he stopped. You were alone against something designed to make you feel alone, Emily said. That's not weakness, that's math. Another silence. Then Gary Henderson said, what happens if we talk to the reporter? It becomes part of a story that's bigger than your situation, Emily said. And stories bigger than individual situations are harder to bury. She paused. I can't promise you outcomes. I can tell you that Richard Whitmore is already retreating from what he tried with me. And I think he's retreating because he can feel something he didn't account for. What's that? People, she said. Not institutions, not lawyers, just people who know what happened and are willing to say so. Gary Henderson was quiet for the longest time yet, long enough that Emily checked the phone to make sure the call was still connected. Then he said, tell the reporter to call me Thursday. I will, she said. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, he said, for calling directly. A pause. A lot of people say they'll do something. Not so many actually do it. She ended the call and sat in the parking lot for a moment in her truck with the engine off. Something was moving now. She could feel the pieces shifting not toward conflict, but towards something that felt like resolution, the specific gravity of a situation finding its natural conclusion. She thought about Richard Whitmore in his office, thinking he had bought himself time with his retreat. She thought about Mercer, cold-footed and cautious. She thought about Strand, the PI, who had told his client the accurate thing and been dismissed. All of these men, capable, experienced men, who had looked at a one-woman repair shop in a 4,000-person mountain town and seen something manageable. None of them had counted on the Hendersons. None of them had counted on Ben Okafor. None of them had counted on the thing that happened when a private investigator sat in a diner and asked questions about Emily Carter, and was met with a kind of genuine community warmth that couldn't be manufactured or purchased or strategically deployed. None of them had counted on the fact that Emily Carter had spent 6 years actually showing up for the people around her, not as a strategy, but because that was who she was, and that you couldn't undo 6 years of showing up with a letter from a law firm. Logan called on a Wednesday evening. It had been 2 weeks since he'd left Red Creek. Emily was home eating dinner at the kitchen table with Caleb when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Logan Whitmore. She looked at Caleb, who looked at the screen, looked at her, and raised his eyebrows. She answered, Carter. Ms. Carter. His voice was different than it had been in the garage or at the festival. The performance register was gone. What was left was something younger, less armored. This is Logan Whitmore. I don't know if you expected. I didn't expect, she said, but I'm listening. I was quiet for a moment. She could hear him working up to something, not nervously exactly, but carefully, the way someone speaks when they've rehearsed something and then decided not to use the rehearsal and are now just trying to find the words in real time. I want to apologize, he said, for all of it. The garage, the festival, everything in between. A pause. I came into your town and I acted like none of it mattered. Like the people in it were just background. And that was wrong. It was completely wrong, and I knew it, and I did it anyway because I didn't. He stopped, started again, because I didn't know how to be in a room without making the room about me. Caleb across the table had set down his fork. He was watching his sister's face. Emily was quiet. She let the silence hold without rushing to fill it because she had learned long ago that how a person handled silence was often more informative than anything they said. Logan didn't try to fill it either. He waited. How did you find the number? She said finally. Marcus, he said. He asked Frank. Frank gave it to him. She thought about Frank Okafor giving Logan Whitmore's best friend her phone number. Frank, who Logan had cut off at the gas pump. Frank, who had talked about Emily warmly to a private investigator. Frank, who had apparently decided that this particular bridge was worth building rather than burning. She made a note to buy Frank a very good cup of coffee. What do you want, Logan? She said. Same question she had asked him in her garage. Same tone. I don't want anything, he said. Not from you. I'm not calling to ask you to. I don't need anything from you. Another pause. You told me in your garage that warnings came from people who were paying attention. I've been thinking about that, And I think the thing I never had in my life was someone who was paying attention without wanting something from the attention. You didn't want to teach me a lesson. You weren't performing. You were just telling me the truth because it was the truth. He stopped. I'm 24 years old, and I think that might be the first time anyone ever did that. Emily looked at Caleb across the table. He was watching her with an expression that she couldn't entirely read, something between protectiveness and curiosity. What about your father? She said. Logan's voice shifted slightly. My father loves me, he said. I believe that, but my father taught me that strength was the only thing worth showing. And I took that and I ran it somewhere he probably didn't intend. A pause. He's been different since he came home, quieter. He won't talk about the legal stuff he tried to do, but I know he tried things. And I know they didn't work. And I think that's the first time in his life that happened to him too. Are you calling me on your own? Emily said. Or does he know on my own? Logan said immediately. He doesn't know I have your number. He doesn't know I'm calling. Okay, she said. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said. I know that's not mine to ask for. People earn that. I haven't earned anything. He sounded like he was choosing every word carefully, the way someone speaks when they've thought about something long enough that they want to get it exactly right. I just wanted you to hear from me directly that I understand what I did and that I'm working on it. Emily said nothing for a moment. Caleb was still watching her. She looked at the table rather than at her brother. She thought about the boy on the ground at the festival asking, "Who are you?" She thought about the first honest question he might have ever asked anyone. She thought about what Dutch had said, "You're the reason this place is what it is." She thought about what she had told Logan at the festival on the ground quietly enough that only the people nearest had heard it. She hadn't said it to be kind. She'd said it because it was true. "Logan," she said, "yeah. What you did at the festival, coming back for the third time when you could have stayed down, that was actually something." She paused. "I don't mean the fighting, I mean the getting up, twice, when you knew you were going to go down again." She paused again. "That's not nothing." He was silent. "People who have real character usually show it first when they're losing," she said. "Not when they're winning. Anyone looks good when they're winning." He was quiet for so long, she thought the call might have dropped. Then my father's never going to be built the way you're describing." "No," she said. "Probably not, but you're not your father." Another silence. "I've been looking into programs," he said. "Coaching, not performance stuff. Actual, the kind of thing where you learn to teach instead of just compete." He said it like a confession, like something he hadn't said out loud before and wasn't sure how it was going to sound. "I'm good at martial arts. I've always been good at it, but I think I've been using it wrong." "You have been," Emily said, "but the skill itself isn't wrong." No, she said, "the skill is real. The application was the problem." "That's a good way to put it," he said quietly. "I've had a lot of time to think about it," she said. He laughed. It was a small, genuine sound, completely unperformed, and it was the most human thing she had heard from him in all their interactions. "I bet you have," he said. "Yeah," she said. Another pause. This one comfortable, in a way the previous ones hadn't been. "I'm going to let you go," he said. I needed to say it directly, without anyone else on the line." "I heard you," she said. "Okay." He sounded like he hadn't entirely expected that. "Okay. Logan," she said before he hung up. "Yeah, the program you're looking into," she said. "The teaching one. Do it. Don't think about it anymore. Just do it." A beat of silence. "Why?" "Because you just spent 20 minutes being honest with someone you don't owe honesty to," she said. "That's the muscle you've been neglecting. Exercise it." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Then thank you, Miss Carter." "Carter's fine," she said. He said goodbye. She ended the call. She set the phone on the table and looked at it for a moment. Caleb was looking at her. "Well," he said. "He apologized," she said. "I gathered. And he meant it," she said. Caleb looked at the phone, then at his sister. "You believe him?" "I do," she said. "Even after everything he's not his father," she said. It was the same thing she'd said to Logan. She meant it both times. She picked up her fork and went back to her dinner. "He's someone who grew up with the wrong instructions. That's different from being the wrong person." Caleb watched her for a moment. Then he picked up his fork too. "You're too reasonable sometimes," he said. "You know that it's a burden," she said. He snorted. They ate the rest of dinner without talking much, and the silence was the kind that didn't need filling. The story ran in the Billings Gazette on a Thursday morning, 31 days after the festival. Bon Okafor had spent the intervening weeks carefully, and it showed. The piece was long, front page above the fold, continued inside with a digital version that included scanned documents and a recorded audio interview with Gary Henderson. It named Richard Whitmore directly. It named the shell companies. It named the intermediaries. It quoted Gary Henderson in his own words, and those words were the words of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down. Emily was the fourth source named in the piece. Her section was 3 paragraphs. It described the letter from Mercer Holt. It described the withdrawal of the complaint. It quoted her saying, when someone tries to use legal infrastructure as a pressure tool against a person who hasn't done anything wrong, that tells you something about the pressure, not the person. It tells you the pressure is artificial. Real complaints don't get withdrawn because a phone rings. She had said it on record, deliberately, clearly, in a sentence she had constructed carefully because she knew it would be read. Dutch called her at 7 in the morning, 20 minutes after the digital edition went live. "I'm reading it," he said. "And it's good," he said. "It's very good. The Henderson section alone." "I know," she said. "You did that," Dutch said. "Ben did that," she said. "Gary Henderson did that. I just introduced them." Emily. Dutch. He paused. "Take the credit. Just this once." She was quiet for a moment. She was sitting in the break room of the shop, first coffee of the morning, an hour before she opened the bays. She looked at the taped-together coffee maker and thought about what it meant to build something that worked even if it wasn't pretty, even if you had to hold it together with electrical tape and stubbornness. "Okay," she said. Richard Whitmore did not call a press conference. He released a statement through Mercer Holt, 3 paragraphs that said nothing meaningful and contested nothing specifically. His attorney told reporters that Mr. Whitmore was reviewing the story's claims and declined further comment. By the following Monday, 2 county commissioners had publicly requested that the state investigate the land acquisition pattern described in the piece. One of them, the commissioner who owed Richard a favor from the land deal 3 years ago, was conspicuously not one of the 2. Richard called Logan that afternoon. Logan was in Seattle, where he had enrolled in a weekend intensive coaching certification course. He stepped out of the session room to take the call. "Have you seen it?" Richard said. "I saw it," Logan said. "This is the reporter Okafor," Richard said. "He's been building this for months. We're looking at our options." "Dad," Logan said, "there are things we can contest. The sourcing is—" "Dad," Logan said again, firmer. "Stop." The silence on the line was significant. "What did you say?" Richard said, not angry, genuinely surprised. It was the particular surprise of a man whose instrument panel had never registered this particular reading before. "I said stop," Logan said. "The story is accurate. You know it's accurate. Fighting it is going to make everything worse, and it's going to cost more than what you'll recover." He paused. "And it's wrong. What you did to those families was wrong, and spending money to avoid admitting it is also wrong." The silence was longer this time. Logan stood in the corridor outside the session room, one hand pressed flat against the wall, and waited. He was doing the thing he had learned to do in the past month, sitting with uncomfortable silence rather than filling it. He was not good at it yet. He was practicing. "You sound different," Richard said. "I am different," Logan said. "Since Red Creek." "Yes," Logan said. "Since Red Creek." Richard was quiet for another long moment. Then, in the voice that Logan had heard twice now, the one that wasn't the builder or the performer, the one underneath everything he said, "I should have told you more things." Logan's jaw tightened. He breathed through it. "Yeah," he said, "you should have. I taught you wrong things." "Some of them," Logan said. "Not all of them. You taught me to work hard. You taught me that nothing came without effort." "Those were right." He paused. "You just didn't teach me that other people's effort mattered the same as mine." Richard said nothing. "You need to call the Hendersons," Logan said, "and whoever else. The families. You need to call them directly, and you need to do it without lawyers in the room." He paused. "That's my recommendation. Take it or don't." Another silence. Then Richard said something that he had said only once before in Logan's memory, in a hospital room when Logan was 9 years old and had broken his arm at a tournament and cried, despite himself, "I'm sorry, son." It wasn't entirely clear whether he was apologizing for the families or for Logan, or for all of it together. Logan didn't ask for clarification. I know, he said. Are you doing okay? Richard said. In Seattle. I'm doing better, Logan said. The program is good. Good, Richard said. He sounded like he meant it. Call the Hendersons' dad. I'll think about it. That means you'll do it eventually, Logan said. Just do it now. He went back into the session room. The instructor, a woman about Emily's age with the particular stillness of someone who had decided something fundamental about herself and stopped second-guessing it, looked up as he came in. Everything okay? Yeah, Logan said. He sat back down. Let's keep going. Frank Okafor came into Carter's auto on the Friday after the story ran. He brought a six-pack of something local, which was both unnecessary and exactly right. He set it on the workbench and stood there looking at Emily with the expression of a man who had more to say than he was going to say and was okay with that. Ben called me, he said the story's already being picked up by the state outlets. I heard that, Emily said. He said you were the one who got the Henderson family to talk. Ben got them to talk, she said. I just made a phone call. Frank looked at her steadily. He was 67 years old and had the eyes of someone who had a refined ability to detect when the people he respected were underselling themselves. Emily, he said. Frank, she said. Let an old man say thank you, he said, without you correcting the record. She looked at him for a moment. Then, thank you for giving Ben my number. That's not, he started. It is, she said. It's the thing that started all of it. So thank you. He nodded. He looked around the shop, the organized tools, the work orders on the board, the coffee maker held together with tape. He looked at all of it the way a person looks at something they understand the value of. You going to stay, he said, in Red Creek? The question surprised her. She looked at him. Why would I leave? I don't know, Frank said. Everything that happened. Sometimes people, they decide it's easier somewhere else. Frank, she said, I earned this town. He smiled. It was a slow, broad, deeply genuine smile, the kind that took over a face completely. Yeah, he said, you did. He left the six-pack. He shook her hand. He walked out into the afternoon and she heard his truck start and pull away. And the sound of it faded down the highway until it was just the ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon in a small Montana town. She stood in the bay and let it settle. Let all of it settle the past month, the past 6 weeks, everything from the moment a black Porsche pulled diagonally across two spaces outside Harding's diner. She thought about something she had told Caleb at the kitchen table. I do have the town. That part is real. She pulled the taped-together coffee maker off the shelf. She looked at it. She had been meaning to replace it for 2 years. She set it back on the shelf, poured herself a cup from it, and went back to work. It made terrible coffee, and it always had, and she had never once thought about getting rid of it because the things you kept working through, stubbornness and improvisation and sheer refusal to give up, were in her experience often the most reliable things you owned. Outside on the highway, a truck she recognized pulled into the lot. Regular customer, transmission issues she'd been tracking for 2 months. The driver climbed out, waved at her through the bay door. She waved back. She finished her coffee. She went to work. 3 months after the Billings Gazette story ran, Red Creek was still talking about it. Not loudly, not in the way of towns that dramatize things for the pleasure of dramatizing them. In the quiet, settled way of a community that had absorbed something significant and was still integrating it into its understanding of itself. People mentioned it at the hardware store and at Harding's diner and in the parking lot after Sunday services. They mentioned Emily's name in a different register than they had before, not the fond, familiar tone of, she's our mechanic, but something that carried more weight, more dimension, the acknowledgement of a person whose full shape had finally become visible. Dale Hutchins had told his wife that he had always known Emily Carter was someone particular. His wife, who had heard him say this 3 times since the festival, did not point out that he had not in fact always known this, because she understood that sometimes people needed to rewrite their own story slightly in order to make sense of the present. She let him have it. She thought Emily Carter probably would have done the same. Donna at the diner had framed the front page of the Gazette on the wall near the register. Not the whole page, just the section with Emily's quote, "Real complaints don't get withdrawn because of phone rings." She had put it in a plain black frame and hung it between a photograph of the diner from 1987 and a watercolor of the mountains that a traveling artist had left in lieu of payment 12 years ago. It fit perfectly between them, which Donna took as confirmation that it belonged there. Emily had come in for dinner the first time after the framing and looked at it on the wall and looked at Donna and said absolutely nothing, which Donna correctly interpreted as the highest possible praise. Caleb had finished his business degree coursework in October, 2 months ahead of schedule, because the situation over the summer had clarified something in him that had been blurry before. He couldn't have explained it precisely, but it had to do with urgency, with understanding more concretely than before that the things you were building didn't wait politely for you to get around to them. Life had a way of arriving whether you were ready or not, and the gap between ready and not was almost always smaller than you thought. He submitted his final project on a Tuesday evening, told Emily at dinner, and she set down her fork and looked at him with an expression that she almost never showed anyone and said, "I'm proud of you." Just that, just those 4 words in a voice that didn't need any additional structure around it. Caleb had not cried. He was 22 and trying to be the kind of person who didn't. But it was close. "What's next?" he said, "for the business side of things." "That's your call," Emily said. "I want to expand the shop," he said. "Add a second bay, maybe a fourth. Hire one person to start." He had been thinking about it for 2 months, and the thinking had the particular density of ideas that had been considered from every angle. "The demand is there. Frank's been sending people from 20 miles out because you're backed up 3 weeks. Emily looked at him. "You've been looking at the books. You gave me access to the books." "I gave you access to do invoicing," she said. "The books were right there," he said. "And you're leaving money on the table every week because you're one person. If we hired someone solid..." "Solid is hard to find," she said. "I know someone," Caleb said. "Guy in my program. His family runs a shop in Bozeman. He's been wanting to move somewhere smaller. He's good, better than good. His instructor said he's one of the best students he's taught in 15 years. Emily looked at her brother across the dinner table. He had the look, the one that meant he had already done more research than she was aware of, had already thought 3 steps ahead, had already decided and was now presenting it as if it were still a question when really it was a proposal. It was, she realized, was something that landed between amusement and genuine surprise, the same look she probably had when she was running an operation and already knew the outcome she was working toward. I was more like her than either of them had fully acknowledged. "Send me his information," she said. Caleb tried not to look too satisfied. He mostly succeeded. Logan Whitmore called again in November. He called on a Tuesday afternoon, and this time Emily was not surprised to see the name on her screen. The first call had done something, broken a seal on something, made a subsequent call possible in a way it hadn't been before. She answered the same way as the first time. "Carter." "It's Logan," he said. "Is this a bad time?" "I'm between jobs," she said. "What's up?" "I wanted to tell you something," he said. "I finished the coaching certification. I passed the final assessment last week." She set down the rag she was holding. "Congratulations." "Thank you." He sounded different again. Different from the call in September, different from the festival, different from every version of Logan Whitmore she had encountered up to now. There was something settled in his voice that hadn't been there before. Not confident in the performed way. Grounded, quieter, the specific quality of someone who has found solid footing after a long time on uncertain ground. "I've been offered a position," he said. "There's a youth center in Seattle. They've been trying to build a martial arts program for at-risk kids. 12 to 17, mostly boys, a lot of them coming out of situations that weren't," he paused, finding the word, "stable." Emily said nothing. She let him keep going. "The pay is not good," he said. "My father has opinions about that." A pause that contained a small, genuine laugh. "Loud opinions. But he stopped. Started again. "I keep thinking about what you said. That real power comes from what you can control in yourself. I've been turning that over for 3 months. And I think these kids need someone who learned it the hard way. Not someone who was always sure. Someone who was wrong for a long time and knows specifically how that happened." "You're going to take it," Emily said. Not a question. "Yeah," he said. "I am." "Good," she said. A pause. "My father called the Henderson family," he said. That surprised her. She didn't show it in her voice, but she was surprised. "When 2 weeks ago, he drove out there himself, didn't bring a lawyer, didn't bring anyone. Logan's voice had something careful in it, the care of someone discussing a thing they're still processing. I don't know exactly what was said. He didn't tell me details, but Gary Henderson called me afterward. A pause. He said your father came and sat at our kitchen table and said he was wrong. That's what Gary Henderson said. Your father sat at our kitchen table and said he was wrong. Emily was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about Richard Whitmore, the man who had built $40 million on the principle that weakness was the only sin sitting at the kitchen table of the family. He had pressured off their land and saying 3 words that probably felt like swallowing gravel. That took something, she said. It did, Logan said. I don't know what it took. I've never seen my father back down from anything in my entire life. But, he paused. I think what happened in Red Creek broke something open in him too. Watching his lawyers retreat, watching the story run, watching me come home from Seattle different than I left. He breathed out slowly. He told me once that the only thing he was afraid of was irrelevance, that his biggest fear was being the person who stopped mattering. A pause. I think he realized that the way he was operating was going to make him exactly that. Afraid of the right thing for the wrong reason, Emily said. Yeah, Logan said. Exactly. That's exactly it. He sounded like someone who had been searching for that formulation and was relieved to hear it articulated. He's doing a review of all the acquisitions, looking at which ones involved the kind of pressure tactics that were in the story. He's talking to his board about remediation. That's significant, Emily said. It's not enough, Logan said. For the Hendersons and whoever else, it's not enough. But it's something, it's a start. Starts are what there is, Emily said. Everything is a start of something. He was quiet for a moment. I want to ask you something, he said, and you can tell me to go to hell. I probably won't, she said. The kids I'm going to be working with, he said, the 12 to 17-year-olds, some of them are going to be like I was. Not all of them for the same reasons, not wealth. Most of them are the opposite, but the same core thing. The thing where you learn early that strength is the only currency, and you spend the rest of your life trying to accumulate enough of it to feel safe. He paused. I don't know how to reach those kids yet. I know martial arts. I know technique. But the other thing, the thing you have where you can stand in front of someone who's performing power and just be steady, I don't know how to teach that. You can't teach it directly, Emily said. Then how? You model it, she said, every day. You show up and you're honest about where you got it wrong, and you don't perform certainty you don't have. Kids like that can smell performance from across a room. They've been reading adults' performances their whole lives to survive. She paused. What they can't detect as easily is the real thing, because most of them haven't seen it enough to recognize it. So when they finally see it, it lands differently than anything else. Logan was quiet. She could hear him thinking. You already know how to do this, she said. You called me in September and you were honest when you didn't have to be. You called me now and you told me things about your father that you didn't have to tell me. That's the muscle. You're already exercising it. It still feels wrong, he said. The honesty. Every time, it feels like walking into a room without armor. Yes, she said. It does. That doesn't go away. You just get better at walking into the room anyway. He took a breath. Okay, he said. Okay. He said it twice the way people do when they're accepting something that is both true and difficult. I'm going to let you go. I wanted to tell you about the certification. And about my father. I'm glad you did, she said. Carter, he said. Just her name. Nothing after it. Good luck, Logan, she said. She ended the call. She stood in the bay for a moment, phone in hand, thinking about a 24-year-old boy in Seattle who was going to walk into a room full of 12-year-olds who had already learned all the wrong things and try to show them something different. She thought about how hard that was. She thought about how necessary it was. She thought about the specific courage of someone deciding to do a hard thing anyway, not because they were certain it would work, but because they understood it was right. She put the phone in her pocket. She picked up her rag. She went back to work. Dutch came to Red Creek one last time before the first snow. He came alone, which was unusual for Dutch. He was almost always accompanied and almost always moving in the context of the chapter. He pulled up to Carter's auto on a Thursday afternoon, just the one bike, and sat on it for a moment. After the engine died, with the particular stillness of a man enjoying the afterimage of a long ride. Emily came out of the bay when she heard the engine. She leaned against the doorframe and waited. Dutch climbed off the bike. He rolled his shoulders. He looked at the shop, at the faded sign, the gravel lot. The second bay they had broken ground for 2 weeks ago. The framing already up, the new space taking shape beside the old one. He looked at all of it and nodded slowly. "You're expanding," he said. "Caleb's expanding," she said. "I'm building the bays." Dutch walked over and stood beside her in the bay door. For a minute, they stood together without talking, looking at the framing of the new addition, the wood raw and pale in the afternoon light. It was a comfortable silence, the kind built from years of trust in the particular shorthand of people who had been through significant things together. "I'm stepping down," Dutch said. Emily looked at him. "President," he said. "End of the year. It's time. Reeves is ready. He's been ready for 2 years, and I've been holding on because—" He paused. "Because letting go of things is hard. You know this." "I know this," she said. "I'm going to New Mexico," he said. "My daughter's down there. I've been missing her kids growing up." He looked at the framing. 64 years old, and I've been prioritizing the wrong things for too long. Emily was quiet. There was something moving in her chest, not grief exactly, but the close relative of grief, the feeling of something large and foundational shifting. Dutch had been in her life for 15 years. He had been the first person who had looked at her completely, all of it, the military history, the skills, the way she moved through the world, and said, "You belong here," without requiring her to be any different than she was. That was not a small thing. That was in certain ways everything. "Who holds my situation?" she said, chapter-wise. "You do," Dutch said. "You always did. The patch doesn't change. Your people stay your people. Reeves understands what Red Creek is. I made sure of that." She nodded. "You worried," he said. "No," she said, "not about that." "Then what?" She looked at the new bay framing. "I keep thinking about what comes next," she said. "Not in a bad way, just I've spent so long managing the situation we came out of. And now the situation is managed. Richard's retreating. Logan's in Seattle. The story ran, the town knows who I am." She paused. "And I'm standing here watching Caleb build something new and thinking, what does it look like when it's just the next chapter, not the crisis, just the regular thing?" Dutch looked at her sideways. "You're asking me what normal feels like." "I'm asking if it ever does," she said. "Feel normal." I was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing this my whole life," he said. 40 years. And what I can tell you is that normal isn't a destination. It's not a thing you arrive at. It's a thing you practice the same way you practice anything else. He paused. Every day you go to work and you fix the trucks and you drink the terrible coffee and you have dinner with Caleb and you help the people who need it. That's not waiting for normal. That is normal. You've been living it for 6 years. Emily looked at him. "The difference now," he said, "is that the town knows it too. That's all that changed. The substance was always there." She let that sit for a moment. She thought about Frank's truck, the Henderson call, Donna's framed quote, Caleb's completed degree, Logan in Seattle, Richard at a kitchen table saying he was wrong. She thought about the taped-together coffee maker that still worked. She thought about 6 years of oil changes and tire pressure and checking vehicles for free for people who couldn't afford breakdowns. "You're right," she said. "I'm 64, Dutch said. "I'm right about more things than people give me credit for." She almost laughed. "You want coffee? Is it still that terrible?" "Worse," she said. "Caleb knocked it off the shelf last week. There's a new crack in the tape." "Then yes," Dutch said, "absolutely." They went inside. The first snow came on a Saturday in late November, soft and early, the kind that didn't accumulate but turned the world briefly quiet in a way that felt like an announcement. Emily opened the shop at 7:30 as usual. She had 2 vehicles booked and a third that Frank had called about his truck was hesitating on startup, something she had been predicting for 6 weeks. The new bay was almost complete. Caleb's hire, a man named Davis, who had driven up from Bozeman 2 weeks ago and immediately impressed Emily by diagnosing a transmission issue in under 4 minutes that she had estimated would take twice that was in the second existing bay, working on a brake job. He was 26, quiet, methodical, with the particular competence of someone who had grown up working with his hands and had genuine respect for the work itself. He and Caleb had a dynamic Emily recognized and appreciated. Caleb talked. Davis listened. Together they covered more ground than either did alone. She was finishing Frank's truck at 10:30 when her phone buzzed. "Ben Okafor," she answered. "Ben." "Hey," he said. "2 things. First, the story's been nominated for a state journalism award. I wanted you to know. That's yours, she said, not mine. I disagree, he said, but we can argue about that later. Second thing, I got a call yesterday from a woman in Cascade County. Similar situation to the Hendersons. Different company, different names, but the same pattern. She read the Gazette story and called my cell directly. Emily straightened up from under the hood. Different company. Different company, Bunn said. But when I started pulling the thread, he paused. Emily, I think the Whitmore operation was one piece of something larger. I think there are 2, maybe 3 other entities doing the same thing in different counties. Different ownership on paper. But the methodology is too similar. She was quiet for a moment. You're starting a new story. I'm starting a new story, Ben said. And I wanted to tell you first, because your situation was the first domino, and because, he paused, because I think the people in Cascade County might need the same kind of call that Gary Henderson got. She thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. She thought about the woman in Cascade County who had read a newspaper story and called a journalist's cell phone directly because she didn't know what else to do. She thought about being alone against something designed to make you feel alone. She thought about what it had cost Gary Henderson to sit in his own kitchen and talk about his grandfather's fields in the past tense. Send me what you have, she said. I'll look at it tonight. I'll send it in an hour, Ben said. And Emily, I know, she said. I haven't asked you yet, he said. You were going to, she said. The answer is yes. A pause. She could hear him smiling on the other end of the line. My father said you were like that. Like what? Already 2 moves ahead, he said. Already there before you said yes. She thought about Dutch saying the same thing in almost the same words in the break room of the shop months ago. She thought about Logan's voice in September saying she was performing Certainty. She thought about Caleb at the dinner table presenting his proposal as a question when it was already a decision. She thought about the years before Red Creek, the operations, the unit, the decisions made in the dark in foreign places, and the years in Red Creek itself, the trucks and the coffee and the quiet, and Caleb growing up at her kitchen table. She thought about all the ways she had learned to see what was coming, not because she was special, but because she had paid attention long enough and hard enough that paying attention had become the structure of how she moved through the world. 2 moves ahead is the only way I know how to walk, she said. I know, Ben said. That's why I called you first. She ended the call. She looked at Frank's truck hood still up, the repair 90% complete. She could hear Davis in the next bay, the precise rhythm of his work. She could hear Caleb on the phone with a customer at the front counter using the patient, clear voice he had developed over the past year. The voice of someone learning that competence and kindness were not in competition with each other. She could hear the soft, particular silence of the first snow outside blurring the edges of the world, briefly making everything clean. She went back to work on Frank's truck. She was under the hood, hands in the engine, when she heard the front door open and boots on the concrete. The specific weight and sound of Frank Okafor coming to check on his truck and probably staying for coffee, even though the coffee was terrible and he knew it and came anyway because that was what he did. How's she looking? Frank said from behind her. She's good, Emily said without looking up. Give me 10 minutes. Take 20, Frank said. Donna sent pie, lemon meringue. Emily stopped what she was doing. She straightened up. She looked at Frank, who was holding a covered plate with the particular expression of a man who knows he has deployed an effective argument. She didn't have to do that, Emily said. No, Frank agreed. She wanted to. He set the plate on the workbench and looked around the shop, the new bay framing visible through the window. Davis in the second bay. Caleb's voice from the front, the coffee maker on the shelf with its extra layer of tape. He looked at all of it the way he'd looked at it before, with the eyes of someone who understood what he was seeing. Town's good, he said. It wasn't a statement about real estate or economy. It was something else entirely. A verdict. Emily looked at him. She thought about everything that had brought them to this specific moment, the festival square. Logan on the ground, the motorcycles coming down the South Road. The letter from Mercer Holt, Ben's story. Dutch on his bike. Logan in Seattle, Richard at a kitchen table. Caleb's degree. The new bay going up. All the dominoes from the moment a black Porsche had pulled across 2 spaces in front of a diner and a man had looked at a town like it already belonged to him. She thought about what it had taken to get from there to here. The discipline, the patience, the phone calls at the right moments to the right people. The restraint of knowing when not to act and the clarity of knowing when to. The years of showing up quietly and building something real and trusting that the real thing would hold when pressure was applied. It had held. Yeah, she said to Frank, town's good. She picked up his coffee from the terrible maker in the same chipped mug she used every day, and Frank stood beside her in the bay door, and they looked out at the first snow of winter coming down soft and steady, over Red Creek, over the gravel lot and the faded sign, in the new bay framing, and the highway stretching out in both directions toward everything that was coming next. The quiet mechanic who had fought when fighting was required and held still when stillness was the harder discipline, and made the calls that needed making, and taken the credit she had earned, and given away what needed giving, and stood steady in her town while everything around her tried to move. That woman drank her terrible coffee in the first snow of the season and felt without performance, without audience, without anyone needing to see it, the specific and irreplaceable satisfaction of a person who had built something true and watched it survive the test of real weight. She had not come to Red Creek to be known. She had not stayed to prove anything. She had stayed because it was hers. And when the world came to take it from her, she had not run, had not hidden, had not fought from anger or ego or the need to be seen. She had simply stood in the middle of what she had built and let it speak for itself. And it had, completely, without question. Red Creek was hers and she was Red Creek's. And nothing that had been thrown at either of them had changed that by a single inch, because some things, once they